Welcome, everybody, to episode 336 of WordPress Weekly for Wednesday, October 31st, 2018, Spooky Edition. I'm your host, Jeff Chandler, joined by JNat Trip and J-Trip.
Hey, Jeff. How are you? How are you doing? You still need a haircut for our listeners at home.
I'm doing, on the right side of my head, I'm trying to get that Triple J look, but it ain't quite working.
Years and years of working from your laptop in a bed is how you acquire a haircut like this.
Okay, well,
spent a lot of time on it.
All right, so yeah, happy Halloween out there, everybody. Stay safe out there. You go trick-or-treating and whatnot. We got a great show lined up for you today. In fact, our guest will be talking to us from the land down under. That is the land of Australia. His name is Andrew Roberts, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Tiny, formerly of, I want to say eFox. He can correct us if we're wrong. And this is the company behind the popular open source Tiny MCE library. And Andrew, thanks a lot for spending some time on this show today.
Thanks very much, guys. Looking forward to it, and thanks for having me on. You'll forgive some of the background noise of Australia waking up here with the birds in the background here, but for the ads, not just detract from things.
No, I don't think so. I think we need some more nature sounds on this show, to be honest. But yeah, great to have you on. So let's, I guess, let's start off in the beginning here. Tell us a little bit about sort of the origin story and how Tiny MCE was started, because I believe it's a family-oriented business, right? It didn't start out family-oriented.
Yeah, in a way, actually. Tiny was born of the merger of two companies, eFox, which is the company that I started, and MoxiCode, which was a company started by the infamous Spocky, who really wrote Tiny MCE for 10 plus years, and his true name is Johan, but prefers to be known as Spocky. And Joachim up in northern Sweden. So it was sort of an interesting coming together of an Australian company with a Swedish company. Yeah, I founded eFox way back in 1999. My father was actually co-founder, so there is a family element to it for sure.
That's cool.
And yeah, and we did one of the first online editors. It was called Edit Live. It was an ActiveX Control written Visual Basic at the time.
Oh, nice. Visual Basic.
Yeah.
I
know.
What version?
VB6.
VB6. Okay.
Yeah. And then we transitioned to a Java applet, and then finally a JavaScript tool called Textbox.io. And then with the merger, now we're all trying to work on the same editor, which is essentially the successors to Tiny MCE. It's such a well-known brand. We renamed the company. We love going on there. So we came together about 3 years ago, and we'd been working with them a little bit before then. I think for 4 or 5 years. Tiny MCE itself was started in 2004. It had a very similar origin story to what we did, which we were building websites, web content management systems, and they sort of zeroed in on the editor portion, and open sourced that, took off. One of the first editors in the space got picked up by WordPress in 2005, I think. So really within a year of founding, just traction over 10 plus years as almost the default tool in the toolbox. Very fortunate to be working with that brand.
Yeah, we have so there's Tiny MCE, and the other one that comes to mind is, I think, SCK Editor. That's another popular editor out there in use in different CMSs. But so if we go back to 2005, WordPress picks up on Tiny MCE. What a symbiotic relationship those two projects have had, both Tiny MCE and WordPress. Kind of talk a little bit about that.
You broke up a bit there, but it was a symbiotic relationship between Tiny MCE and the enterprise side?
Or Tiny MCE and WordPress. How those two benefit each other over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's hard to say that it actually drove terribly much revenue over the year for both MoxiCode and for us. But in terms of brand awareness, it's been absolutely, WordPress at the time was nobody knew about it, and today it runs 30+% of the web. Right. So it brought an exposure of Tiny MCE brand and technology to millions of people, hundreds of thousands of developers. It's and then when they had their own project outside of WordPress, they sort of knew which tools to turn to. So I would say, to the extent that TinyMCE has any fame and notoriety, a lot of that could be attributed to its role in WordPress over almost 15 years.
The concept of a rich editor back in the early 2000s was this was a lot of folks' white whale for a while, like getting a really performant, natural, comfortable feeling rich editor was not an easy it was. I remember specifically trying to build one in VB3 using a picture box and bit blitting and drawing and trapping everything, because the ActiveX component in the older versions of Visual Basic were not really all that good. They frankly were difficult to work with. They were complicated. They were their APIs were not really exposed in a way that made integrating with them very straightforward. The documentation was lacking, and that was one of the things with TinyMCE out of the gate when WordPress, picked it as its tool. Was all of those things were. It made it really easy to integrate it as a separate, but still, it felt really natural. It felt right, and it was easy to extend and work with. So,
sure.
Not to answer your question for you, but I mean, you've spent a lot of years trying to build a visual editor in not just the web, but in other platforms. And so, from then until now, how you've spent your life's work building a visual editor for the web, and I, for one, have
since 1999. It's
right.
Crazy.
It's
and it's still going.
WordPress wouldn't be what it is without the work that you guys have done. In my opinion, I think.
Absolutely, and we have an amazing software developer, Johan. If you go to the commit logs for TinyMCE, he has single-handedly written 99% of it. And I think most people don't realize it's close to 100,000 lines of code.
Oh yeah.
WordPress itself is only 300,000 or 400,000 lines of code right now. If you exclude Gutenberg. Gutenberg itself is now just caught up to be 100,000 lines of code. But it's been a complicated. It's been his life's work for sure. So it's been great to watch that. Yeah, back in 2005, it would have only worked in Internet Explorer. At the time, I was working on a Java applet, which was the only way to get any sort of cross-browser capability.
That's right.
And then I think it was Firefox finally added content editable. And Vim came along, and I don't know. It's been somewhat of an exhausting space, to be honest with you. The changes in JavaScript over the last 15 years. I can appreciate
that. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's for sure. Over the years, we have watched TinyMCE be a really good example of how open source collaboration works between two projects that are 100,000 lines of code is a lot of code. And so it's these are two actively developed external pieces of software that come together in harmony. I mean, really harmoniously to make the open web a much better place. And so with a lot of the emphasis, especially in WordPress core development on our podcast being about Gutenberg and what the next generation of visually editing the web is, I'm curious to hear what you think that is, because I can't really imagine a person that might have more of the experience or insight into what the web or the objects or the code is really truly capable of pulling off right now. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Gutenberg and how TinyMCE fits into that, how you think you fit into that.
There's a lot there, I guess.
I ask the big questions, unfortunately. Jeff knows that, so he just lets me run with it.
Very good. So obviously it's a big change. TinyMCE's role is significantly changed in Gutenberg. It's really just providing some of the core rich text editing library, and honestly they've wrapped it in a way that they could swap it out if they wanted to. So TinyMCE's role has certainly changed. I don't think the role of a word processing style experience, or the need for that rather, has gone away.
I agree.
So I think either the classic block will live on more so than perhaps it's been anticipated right now, or third-party plugins will come in that will restore a more of a word processing style experience. Just for the ad hoc rich text that it's not worth mucking around with blocks with. But to be used in blocks that need more advanced rich text capabilities, Gutenberg itself provides pretty basics there. Certainly. So I don't know what else to say is there about Gutenberg. In terms of its user experience, there's some work to be done there. I perhaps I'm biased, but I really like the toolbar top. I don't know if you've discovered that setting.
Unified toolbar.
I do too. I agree.
The top toolbar view just sort of reduces some of the clutter and animations inside. And obviously that was a debate that happened. Perhaps another backstory is that we had a few people from Tiny, ClearFox at the time, working on Gutenberg during 2017. So we helped with some of the design, the usability testing, the coding through to the through December 2017. So we're involved pretty early on in the project, and clearly, yeah, the WordPress core developers wanted to take it this very block-based approach right down to the paragraph, and that limited our ability to really help them because our forte is more in the word processor style experience. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing with we've both been around technology and software and the web for long enough to watch people try to sort of resolve problems that have already kind of been solved. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like TinyMCE has, I know that it is kind of in the WordPress world, people love to hate it, even though I don't feel like that's appropriate. Matt has always kind of said that he wants a block-based editor and he wants more, he wants this or that, but TinyMCE has always done exactly what I personally imagined that it needed to for me to be able to publish content to the web. And so every 10 years now, we're 15 years worth of WordPress. It turned 15 this year. And so it's not unnatural or it's not abnormal for people to want to reinvent something or try to see because frankly, they haven't gone through what Johan or what you guys have gone. They don't know what you know. They need to see it for themselves. They need to write a content editable editor because you guys solved that problem a long time ago. Developers today haven't solved the problems you guys solved. And so it's interesting to watch new school folks go through that again, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're not the only company that sorry, WordPress is not a company. Not the only project that is decided to try and build their own editor. And in fairness, when you attack a domain, TinyMCE is a very generic library, right? We serve hundreds of thousands of applications. We need to be general purpose. So at some point, it does make sense for a project if editing's so core, which it is to WordPress, to in-house some of that to make it very domain specific. So we don't begrudge that, but it is a ton of work. And I think Gutenberg was initially slated for the end of 2017. Here we are at the end of 2018, and we
still think it's too soon.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. Yeah. It still feels like it needs some time to bake. But you know, it's going out, and there's something to be said for just setting a deadline and going for it. Otherwise, it would have been 3 years or 4 years. And CK Editor, you mentioned them before. I think they've just finished. They haven't even finished. They're fairly well the way through rewriting FCK Editor, and it's taken them 4 years. So,
I've always imagined. I appreciate TinyMCE as a utility, like a legitimate utility that you see in the world. Like TinyMCE is the electric company for me. Like the work that you guys are able to do is something that happens without me that I don't need to worry about, you know? And so
that's awesome.
As a long-time WordPress contributor for me personally, trying to reinvent the electric company doesn't seem like time well spent, because you guys have already solved these problems in a way that makes sense and is trustworthy and is tried and true. And so to try and own it doesn't seem like it's our wheelhouse. It's not our what we do good. It's not what we do best. You guys already did it.
It's certainly classic Adam Smith, specialize in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're a fairly big team. We've got 25 plus developers, and most of them, no, about half work on the TinyMCE core that is open source. And I mean, we do modernize TinyMCE, but we try and keep it, as you said, sort of electric utility status. So we've migrated the whole code base to TypeScript in the last 2 years, for example, but we've kept it 100% API compatible. TinyMCE 5 is out in developer preview right now, and we've rewritten the entire user interface library. So, you know, all the dialogues and all that sort of stuff now utilize a whole bunch of new UI components. But again, this time it'll be 90% API compatible. But yeah, we're trying a bit of a different approach. Everything needs to be modernized, right? Particularly in the JavaScript world. Right. But we're trying to modernize a little bit more in place rather than do a bottoms-up rewrite, so that we can ship parts of it as we go.
I'm going to keep boring Jeff because I have one last question then before he takes over and shuts me up, which is we don't talk a lot about it on our show. Other shows talk about it a little bit more, but I would love to hear more from you about how you guys have, I mean, you said you had 25 employees, and for a piece of software that is open source, and running a profitable open source, or at least a maintainable, sustainable open source company is not easy. Anyone who's tried it knows that. And so what's the, not that there's a magic bullet here, but can you tell us a little bit about what your experience or journey has been over the past 15 or so years with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I initially built a commercial software company. So it was 100% proprietary software around editing. So, and then starting about 4 or 5 years ago, starting to get into open source with TinyMCE, and then 3 years ago, got full on into it. We now have we actually have almost 50 employees. So just 25 in software development and design.
That's incredible.
So we've got about 1,000 paying customers. They range from $100 a month to seven-figure. We have, you know, a couple of seven-figure style customers. Most of the ways people monetize open source didn't really work for us. So services and support was a good example. Very few people needed support for Tiny. They could figure it out on their own. They could, you know, the documentation, whilst not perfect, was good enough for most people to figure it out. And if they needed help, they really only needed to point in the right direction, not weeks and weeks worth of services. So it's a little bit different than WordPress. Hosting, again, didn't make terribly much sense initially, in that it's just a JavaScript library. We now have a cloud version, which is starting to work pretty well, which pairs it with some back-end services. But the number one key for us was to have some proprietary, proprietary add-ons that added to the core, and to bundle that up with services, support, a commercial license agreement. So there really was a premium version of Tiny. And I think in any market, whether it be silk scarves or editors, there's a premium buyer. There's somebody who has the budget, who has the need, who feels they perhaps deserve the best. So that's the sort of buyer that we're trying to appeal to. But yeah, it's been premium features for us. Some of the better, more important premium features were like copying and pasting from Word. We've got a great cleanup library that we add in,
which is an
image management.
Out of work. Getting that to work probably took a long time.
Oh yeah, it's actually we've rewritten it recently, but it was part of we actually ported it from Java using GWT originally because it was a little bit like QuickTime or something. You didn't want to try and figure that out.
Exactly.
We just patched and fixed it over a very long period of time. Upon custom, we had asked Word documents they'd send us and say this isn't working. So
great.
Anyway, so
well, I mean,
so proprietary features were the main value proposition. In that and particularly we built such a good brand feeling that in some respects people will want the paid version if it gives them some value. They're almost looking for an excuse to buy the paid version, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. SQL Pro, MAMP, there's a lot of like applications that have been around for a long time that are so good that are free that eventually, as a professional, you're like, I should pay you. And so then there is some people that just convert. But having an ecosystem behind it where you can offer real value adds to people who deserve or not, or like you said, that are playing at a level where they really do feel like they need the advanced features that you provide. It translates well, I think, to probably a lot of our listeners that have WordPress plugins or themes that something is free and then have add-ons underneath it where they provide support or anything else. So I think it's relevant because it applies to what I think a lot of people are doing with WordPress too.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I gave a talk up on WordPress TV where I dive into more details about that.
Cool. But, well, make sure Jeff links to that in the notes then.
Awesome.
Well, on the subject of running a successful company, earlier this month, Tiny raised $4 million in Series A round funding from Blue Run Ventures. And in addition to the funding, Jeff Tannenbaum, partner at Blue Run Ventures, has joined Tiny's board of directors. So what can you tell us about how the company is going to use that $4 million?
Sure. So we were profitable. We didn't necessarily need to raise the money, so we'll invest the money in additional headcount. So that started. We were probably profitable at 35, 40 people, and we're already at 50, so we're starting to spend a little bit of that money. Mostly in product is the focus. So sort of coming back to the commercialization question, we have a very amazingly good open source project. We need to build enough delta value above and beyond the open source project to convince people to pay, to open their wallet and jump on board. We have the cloud platform that we're this Tiny Cloud thing as well, which requires engineering effort. So they're the two main things, and then obviously continuing to expand the brand and marketing and I don't know.
Like recently, there's Tiny Drive, I think, which is a cloud storage solution, and the Tiny App Directory, which I believe is a library of
Tiny Drive
add-ons for Tiny MCE.
Yes, we'll include the open source add-ons on that as well, but it's effectively the WordPress plugin directory, if you like, but we'll allow commercial vendors on there as well. The Tiny Drive, so when people integrate a rich text library, one of the first things that they want to enable people to do is to insert images or videos or other things like that. Now, wiring up image upload isn't terribly difficult. There is, PHP image upload handlers and so forth. But we felt we could provide that all out of the box with a nice file picker, with You know, the ability to preview things before you insert them, automatic background image upload. Just take that piece off the table. So instead of spending a few extra weeks developing that, you'll just get it straight out of the box. And you know, with cloud these days, we can give you some free storage as part of our free tier. And then once you hit some limits, you can then upgrade to paid. We'll also have a plugin which will let people put it on their own S3 directory, so we won't even keep your files. You can keep them nice and secure on your own AWS account. So yeah, we think that's going to be pretty good. Moxie Code, which was the Joachim and Johan's company, had a product called Moxie Manager, and they ended up having 40,000 unique paying customers on that.
Wow,
over the years.
That's cool. Wow, that's neat.
So TinyDrive is sort of the successor to that. So we feel pretty good about that product, that it's gonna work all right.
Well, it is the difference between a rich editor and a wealthy editor, right? Like, rich editing text is not easy, but that's one thing. But being able to integrate media, videos, images, serving that at any kind of scale at all, handling thumbnails, resizing. This is like a WordPress problem too, with why Jetpack has Photon. There are like things that these are not easy problems to solve. And so to go that next level and solve those problems for people is a value add. That's a big deal to be able to not worry about those. So that's cool. 40,000, woo! Compared to the, you know, you say that Tiny or the entire editor had 1,000. The jump from that to the cloud, it proves that that's the direction that folks were hoping to go.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully that'll add to our active customer numbers over the next couple of years as we scale up. You know, go from 1,000 to 10,000, right? That's the next big milestone for us.
That's right.
Yeah, and let's see, back at businesses, we do everything subscription business model. So I don't think, you know, 3-4 years ago that was that accepted. I feel like today people just get that.
You're right.
But,
I agree.
Having run a software company in the past, I hated the upfront license model. It was sort of, I don't know, it was like a whole bunch of one-night stands instead of committed relationships.
I agree on both sides. Like, even as a consumer, buying a license like that never felt right either. Right. So it's not even just serving the license like that never felt right.
Yeah.
But like, even consuming it that way didn't ever feel valuable either. So the subscription model with the right price point on the right thing makes a lot of sense. Like, I really don't like paying Adobe $90 a month. But like, I'm comfortable paying some people $5 a month for something that is idly buy whenever I need it, right? So the subscription model works really well whenever you do need it. It is like an insurance policy that you need, that you feel comfortable having and getting value out of whenever you know, duty calls, I guess. So
yeah, and being a vendor, so having run a transactional software business and now a subscription software business, I can tell you have way more conversations about customer success, customer support. Are we doing, you know, let's measure customer satisfaction, you know, do everything we can to improve it, hire people. You do make different investment decisions to try and retain customers, which is, whereas I think, you know, the old upfront license fee and maintenance mode, support was very much a little bit of an afterthought, unfortunately. But you know, you were forced to sort of, because 80% of your revenue next year was going to come from upfront transactional fees. That's where your focus was.
Do you guys have a black T-shirt like the one that you're wearing now that I can have? Because I really want that shirt. I know our listeners can't see your shirt, but gosh, is that a killer shirt? I wanted it black. That's a great shirt.
Excellent.
It's the tiny logo, the logo mark and the icon mark, but with the hover bar and the pointer with the bold, italic, underline, list, link, quote, like all the like fundamental UI that you want as like the bar above it is just such a great look. It communicates so clearly what
he's a walking unified toolbar.
That's right. I
There
want
we go.
it.
Unified toolbar.
It is a great shirt. Where do you get that shirt?
we'll make sure you get one for sure. So
I love it. Thank you.
And that's awesome. So just wrap it up here, but no, I thought it was interesting that I believe it was you who might have published this. It was a Gutenberg FAQ published on the Tiny website, and there's some interesting things noted about the differences and similarities between Tiny MCE and Gutenberg. And something I thought was interesting is that version 5 of Tiny MCE, which you've mentioned, the developer edition, it's out for preview. The beta is out. There's not, in the library itself, there's not a block concept per se, even though I guess you could use a non-editable plugin to implement some block-like behavior. And I imagine that you guys will be keeping a very close eye on how the block-based editor rolls out and sort of the reception it has in WordPress. And if it just so happens to be the future of editing and creating content, you think perhaps a block-based editor by default could be, might be possible for the Tiny MCE library itself? Like that would become the core experience.
So yes and no. We part of our rationale as a company to get involved with the Gutenberg project was really to learn about block-based editing and the various approaches to the UI and the trade-off. I think you mentioned earlier that sort of you beat on the wall and you reinvent the wheel, I guess, and you come back to the same UI solutions that a lot of other folks have, and you're like, you start off trying to be very innovative, and you end up iterating back to the middle, and you're like, oh, now I know why they did it this way, or I can see 2 viable solutions, but the 15 that I was thinking about initially, 13 just don't work, right? Particularly for editing. So it was great to be involved in that project. We're certainly looking at it. Adding rich media is something that people can do today with Tiny with a non-editable plugin. The current version of WordPress uses a sort of a tweak on that with the views concept. That like if you embedded a video in WordPress today, it sort of has a non-editable block. So it's not full block; it's half block. For want of a better description.
Right. I get what you're saying. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we are very interested. In 2019, we'll take more a look at block-based editing. 2018 for us was more about the user interface layer, so the toolbars and the dialogues and all that sort of stuff. So we'll take a little bit more of a look at the core editing experience. I see value in blocks, but we view our biggest competition as Microsoft Word, not Gutenberg or Wix or Weebly or anything like that. Most of our customers or users are using us to replace a process that involved Word plus email.
Right.
And I say Word because we've even done surveys, and Google Docs isn't really in the mix. This is corporate.
In fact, that there were so many people writing in Word and then pasting in WordPress. They created a button. They created a way to easily paste text, so it kept your formatting from Word into WordPress.
Yeah. So that's the most common workflow for us. So, and people don't tend to use these publishing tools on a day-to-day basis, right? They're using their Microsoft Office or Google Docs, and then they're transitioning to whatever system it is, whether it be a CRM or a content management system or what have you. They're only using that for, I don't know, an hour a day at most. So, you want them to be able to reuse their skills. So we're going to, we've really spent this year refining our design vision, and we're going to stick pretty close to the knitting of a word processor style experience. We feel there's a good market opportunity for that. For businesses who are creating workflows that they want to automate it, that's great. They want to put it in a database. They want to, put it in the cloud, do whatever. It's much better than Word and email, but they still want to bring users across with them and bring the skills across from people. And I do wonder a little bit with Gutenberg whether the right competitor was identified there. If really the competition wasn't wasn't Wix and Weebly, but the competition was people using Word and email.
Right.
And if that started with that premise, whether they would have arrived maybe somewhere a little differently.
So I'm going to force Jeff to not cut me off because you've segued into something that I can see him smugly yielding to me, which I appreciate. Because you brought up a good point, which I think tangentially our listeners will find like an interesting fork of our conversation, because one of the things that happened with Microsoft Word now is that they did overcomplicate it, right? I mean, they really did turn Microsoft Word into an application that is capable of so many more things than simply just word processing. And frankly, that is kind of what happens with an application like Gutenberg, is it becomes this very UI-centric, heavy, Swiss Army knife to all things that it does not ultimately solve a whole ton of problems very well. And so, like with Microsoft's shift to Office 365 and most of their editing being online, with Google Docs moving really just wholly 100% online, with looking at the way that Apple has even implemented a lot of their iCloud. You can edit a Keynote document through the iCloud.com website, and it looks and feels like iCloud on your computer. Like the things that these big corporations with thousands of employees that are the things that they are able to pull off on the web with not just a rich editing experience, because what Tiny does, and or Tiny MCE specifically, in terms of rich editing, really is the best experience for editing text on the web that you can get. But what all of these other applications are doing, with Keynote on the web, or Google Docs on the web, or Office 365 on the web, they are going a completely different, much more complicated direction with editing, not just words and not just tables, but images, media, video, floating, left, right, up, down, blocks, kind of, but not really blocks. And then you mentioned Weebly, Wix, some of these other editors where they are going a different direction with like very literal Minecraft style blocks, which is what WordPress is going with Gutenberg. And so, you're watching this kind of going, like you said, the other direction of competing more or less with Microsoft Word. And Word is not a web editor. It is a text editor with a bunch of other crap bolted onto it. How much crap do you plan on bolting on? Or on the block concept goes, there's a lot of online competition with online editors that are not the simple experience that WordPress is quite frankly known for, or that TinyMCE is quite frankly known for, with providing a smooth, fast, kind of elegant text editing experience. So, I don't know if you've used them all the way that I've used them, but mean, if there's a 5-year plan for you guys, not that anybody knows what's happening in 5 years, but if TinyMCE, let me wrap this up. If you guys had gone block-based editor, then Gutenberg wouldn't even need to happen, because TinyMCE just did blocks, right? And so WordPress just gets blocks now. But instead, you guys are going the other direction, which is probably great for you guys. But if the competition is Wix or Weebly, what's the then TinyMCE becomes the single block for paragraphs and not the editor experience for websites. So,
sure.
What do you?
It is a good question, and it's really hard, even with 25 people or whatever. Like, it's still a very small development team to allocate your resources.
It is absolutely very small. It's
and
huge.
It is a little bit of a bet.
At the same time, you have 25 brilliant, amazing minds that are competing with 2,500
Yeah, or
amazing
25,000 or whatever.
all,
Yeah.
all these other places. So it's an enormous undertaking and a great product for the 25 folks that are working on it.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I call it layout versus writing. And I just don't want us to, I think we want to embrace layout without screwing up the writing experience. So, and the writing experience, whether we like it or not, is very close to a word processor style thing. We probably first start learning it when we're age 5, right? By the time you hit the workforce, you've got 15, 20 years experience. You don't realize it, right? But it's caked in there. Just the way lists are supposed to work. You know, press tab or shift tab and it splits the list, or or whatever, right? Like, or for me, the one that got me on Gutenberg was that you're supposed to, in a list, in a word processor, you can, if it's the list toolbar icon is latched and you press it, it converts it back to a paragraph. Well, it doesn't do that in Gutenberg.
I know. I noticed that too. Oh, it killed me. I noticed that too.
I know, but you don't even think about these tiny little workflows in your head, right? Like that you've built up over the last 20 years. So we don't want to screw that layout. Is something that a lot of our customers are trying to do, whether it be for email newsletters, or so Marketo's a customer of ours, or you know, page building. Obviously, a lot of content management systems are there. We play right now, as you said, as the rich text editor for paragraphs or for you know, blog post blocks, rather than the whole block editing experience. I think the answer is we're going to look at it more and more and more in 2019. You're right. If we had tackled page building before, it might have obviated the need for Gutenberg.
Right.
And there are many other CMSs that use TinyMCE right now. Craft CMS, Joomla, a bunch of different ones. So there's definitely demand there for more block-based or page layout type capabilities. They are slightly different paradigms, so we need to figure out how to make that work. So we'll see.
Well,
and
at the
obviously,
very
it's
least,
interesting.
at the very least, when Gutenberg is released with WordPress 5.0, and we now have millions of people across the world using Gutenberg, that's like free market research for you guys.
Oh, it is absolutely. And, you know, I've been reading all the reviews on the plugin directory, and, you know, it's not simple. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who didn't like it, but I've been reading all of those comments about, like, what didn't they like, you know, trying to really parse that and internalize that. I think it's a matter of when, not if, that we'll do a layout mode of TinyMCE. Where you can do it in a block-based thing. So it's just interesting. Will we keep a unified toolbar? Will we do this? Will we do that? So I think we've learned a lot, continue to learn. Obviously, Gutenberg will iterate over the next 3 to 6 months, and we perhaps can take some of the learnings there and apply it to TinyMCE. But layout and writing is different. I mean, that's why in Apple Pages, I don't know, you may not have noticed, there's actually a layout mode.
There is.
You can go File, Page Layout mode, right? So they're really two different paradigms. I can see us definitely doing something there over the next 12 to 18 months. But again, we feel like being a familiar, really great writing experience is where it's at. You mentioned building crap around the core editing experience like Google Docs and Word has. That's kind of our business. We build those things.
Right. Yeah. You have to.
Not everybody needs them, right? Like, you know, bold, italic, and underline is fine, and you can use the free version of TinyMCE for that. But if you want more advanced capabilities, you know, that is approximating more a Google Docs or a Microsoft Word, we hope to be there to provide some of those features. And coming back to, sorry.
And at least in TinyMCE's case, people can make the choice to bolt on crap instead of just
it's plugin architecture.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so TinyMCE Core, we have 56 official plugins to TinyMCE that we build and maintain that add things like word count, or, you know, page properties, or source code, you know, syntax highlighting, source code mode. All of these things are add-ons that you can put onto Tiny. So we're trying not to bloat the core and keep that as lean and mean as dare I say, tiny as possible. So you knew at least one pun had to come.
I'm surprised it took this long, frankly. But
yeah. just user interface is really interesting. One perspective that I have is Tiny has menus. Right? The default version in WordPress doesn't turn them on, but if you turn on TinyMC Advanced, you get menus. I think it's a wonderful user interface concept that's underused in rich text editors, including Gutenberg, because people are used to seeing file, edit, view, insert, tools, help, right? Yeah. So we embrace that for most of our customers. We try and say that's a really good idea because you can keep the toolbar fairly contained instead of having 4 rows of toolbar buttons like Joomla does. You can just have a menu and one row of toolbar buttons, and so it's an example of iterating back to a concept that was probably available in Xerox PARC in the 1970s, but it still works for us today. You know?
And that was one of the conversations I had back in the day with Coop, with Daryl Coopersmith, the old WordPress contributor, talking about the media library in WordPress, or TinyMCE specifically, is that the old-timey kind of file, edit, view, help menu that everyone has known to love is just so familiar, cross-platform, and everyone understands the shortcut keys. Everyone knows what to expect there with all of those things. So there is something to be said for the familiarity of those menus. They are tucked away nicely. They are sort of ancillary to the primary functions of a rich editor, where you're right, bold edit, underline, lists, links, quotes, things that pretty common, right? Images, sure. But there's a ton of other functionality that is available to us that when you do need it, should be made available to you. And so this whole next generation block-based web world of things is just really, frankly, catching up with the things that editors like Word and other have had for a really long time. And there are companies that are going a wholly other direction with VR, AR, web components, 3D rendering, OpenGL. There's like a ton of other stuff that is like not related to anything that we're working on really at all. But if we build this right, we build Gutenberg right, you build TinyMCE right, these things are all one and the same. They all come back to a same sort of unified, simple set of components that we all get to use together. So,
yeah, and look, the world is evolving. I mean, I think the other mistake we make as innovators is we think Word is something that hasn't changed, but they're releasing updates every 2 or 3 months.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They are experimenting with a simplified toolbar where they have just one row of toolbar buttons and it's tabbed toolbar, but you can see them starting to experiment with the user interface out there. They have access to data. They have amazing user experience people on their team, same with Google, same with Apple. As an industry, we're trying to innovate. I think it's wrong to cast people into old school, new school, and say, only Medium gets it, right? Like Microsoft and Apple have people thinking about this too. So, where does this go? And I think hats off to Tammy and Jon and the other designers on the Gutenberg project. They weren't afraid to sail away from safe waters.
That's right.
And try a lot of really almost experimental things with editor design. And I think they probably knew when they did that they would end up iterating closer back to the status quo, or to mainstream, I guess would be the way to say it. But innovating in this space is tough. You sort of put your neck out and not see whether you're shot at it, see whether it actually connects with you before you put your head down again. And unfortunately, I think we've seen a lot of that with Gutenberg, where they tried a lot of new things, and that's caused some friction. But you've got to admire their bravery in doing that. And I think that ultimately Gutenberg will be more innovative than if they'd just incrementally changed from the old editor experience towards block-based editing.
I think that's like the ultimate message for Gutenberg that I don't think anyone has championed for that team as elegantly as I think you have just now. Is that it does take a lot of bravery to experiment with things that are perceivably not they solve problems, and so to go over it again and again and try something way around the other direction, it is sort of, it takes a lot of courage and support from folks that are trusting you to take some time to try something unique or different, or test some things that everyone else has kind of been accustomed to for a while. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, and I think Matt's probably had a tough year. Matt Mullenweg with some of the criticisms around Gutenberg, but I admire his courage and leadership, because if he hadn't put his brand equity on the line, if he hadn't invested his goodwill in doing this, this would never be launching in a month's time.
Right.
If this, if is the wrong word, this will turn out for the better. There may be a painful year or two, but in the grand scheme of things, this will turn out for the better. So it's taken a lot of courage and bravery for him to do that. He's taken a lot of shots in the back, and but that's why he gets paid the big bucks, as they say, I guess.
Well, Andrew, man, I want to thank you again for spending a lot of your quality time there from Australia to be on our show today and giving us some insight on Tiny the company, Tiny MC, the library, some background history, and giving us some insight on what you think the future holds for content editors. So how could people get in touch with you? And
Sure, I'm on Twitter at Andrew_Roberts. You can contact me through the website, send me an email, andrew@tiny.cloud. All of the above.
We need to get you to the U.S. to attend like WordCamp US. That would be cool to have you there.
Actually, funnily enough, I live in California now, so I just happen to be back in Australia visiting my folks at the moment. So I've got a 10-month-old who's crawling around somewhere here. So back showing him to the grandparents.
Oh, the tiniest of the MCEs.
Well,
exactly.
If not Nashville this year, I'll get you to St. Louis.
I may be in Nashville this year.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Really? Oh, that would be cool. Oh, we should hang out and have a beer, coffee, or something. I'd love that.
Awesome.
Oh, that'd be great. So enjoy the rest of your day down there, and I hope
Thank you.
you're he's not being taken care of by koalas or anything. He didn't crawl away too far.
That's not a funny joke to make, and that's not okay. You shouldn't say like that.
What are you talking about? Get out of here with that.
Well, we're gonna let's ride in on a tractor, Jeff. Yeah, you live in Ohio, of all things. Let's eat some more corn.
People call Ohio the sure pocket of the United States.
Oh,
sadly, we took him and he got a bunch of photos with a koala yesterday. So there you go.
Take that, John. All right, Andrew, man. Before this time's done.
All right, thank you
thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day, man.
All right, thanks for hanging out with us, Andrew. This is awesome.
And that was Andrew Roberts, the CEO and co-founder of Tiny. Great to have him on the show. That was cool.
That was super cool.
That's pretty cool. So, well, it's 4:00. I do want to cover a couple of things here before we wrap it up. Officially wrap it up. The first is a post written by not yours truly, but yours truly's co-host John. He tested out the WordPress 5.0 beta 1 version of Gutenberg, I believe, and whoo, boy, what a good time you had.
I spent about an hour and a half writing that out. It wasn't a lot of time, but it was just like let's just click through what's available and see how it goes. So yeah, I mean, anyone can check it out. You'll put it in the show notes. I'm sure it's fine, but So I guess here's my 2-second, and then I'll let you ask questions because I don't want to come off as like a hater or anything. But like, I think for like general writing, if you're going to write text and just keep going and plowing through writing a post, it's actually pretty good. Like just writing, hit enter, writing, hit enter, writing, hit enter. That experience is pretty dialed in. Like that feels.
Boy,
like,
it should be.
Well, yeah, right. But I think it is totally okay for that. But click for click after that, images, drop caps, things like that, like it fell apart pretty quickly for me. And as like I do dumb things when I write, and so I write very phonetically the way that I talk, and so I am a Midwesterner who talks in a weird way and writes in a weird way. And so my blog post was really truly just like, let's talk about the experience of typing out, testing the experience. It was kind of goofy and a little bit meta, but it was a lot of fun for an hour and a half while Carrie and I were watching some Halloween movies that weren't really scary because I don't get scared by Halloween movies. So yeah, there's some snaggy edges that could probably be filed down a little bit better. I've been lurking in the core design channel while Tammy and others, Joe, Miguel, Alexis, of some folks have been chatting away, and they're working on it. But my experience testing WordPress 5.0 beta 1 with Gutenberg deeply integrated into it was like 50-50. It was great in that, like we've talked about in previous episodes, Gutenberg was the default editor. You click add new on a post and you got Gutenberg, and you type and that feels right. Like as dorky as that sounds, and you can snicker at me all you want, Jeff.
Snickering because of a comment I read in your on the article. On my bad.
Oh no. Okay, you can bring it up. It's fine. We can talk about it. But it having it be the default UI, it doesn't feel wrong, right? Like just post add new and there you are. Other than the flash of white background that Gary and I are going to work on, it feels pretty natural as the default editor. It's all the nitty gritty of like where hovers and enters and up and down arrows start to be a little. They all feel like someone meant for it to work the way that it does, but mentally it did not work the way my brain expected it to. And that's a bug that's hard to file. And it's hard to file that bug with I feel like, I don't know, 25 or so native blocks that come by default in Gutenberg. And so there were a lot of little UI and UX things that, to me, in my experience, the way that I type and how I would normally do it, that were that, you know what? So Jeff, I used to say, and it meant to sound bad, but I used to say that the first time I found WordPress, I really didn't like it all that much, and that's what motivated me to get involved with WordPress and help make it better. And so Gutenberg reminds me a lot of that feeling where I use it and I go, gosh, this could be a lot better. Not that it's bad, but it could be a lot better. And so my hope is that for newer, next generation WordPress contributors to help make the web and the democratizing publishing a better thing, that folks will come to this and go, gosh, this is pretty great. I love the way that this works, but I can see that it could be better. And here are my contributions to improving it. So my hour and a half of publishing a post, it really reminded me of my experience 10 or 12 years ago, making WordPress better. I think that we'll see a whole new crop of folks improving Gutenberg the same way that a lot of folks improve WordPress. So it's merged, it's gonna happen, but there's a lot that is ready to improve.
So in your article, in your test, you say it's hard to know if that's a bug or a feature, and someone commented that this should be Gutenberg's slogan.
which
So I thought that was funny.
It is a funny comment, but and if I was going to translate that to my own post and my experience, is anything that's in my post is not meant to be insulting. It's not meant to be a jab at anything.
It's just how you feel. I mean,
how I felt writing it is very reactionary to what was happening and going on, and so.
And again, shout out to Tammy who
she
responded to your comment with an in-depth comment of her own, and actually linked to some GitHub issues of things you brought up that are being addressed, that are being worked on.
That's right. Tammy's awesome. Tammy is.
She even said hello to Mr. Paul.
She said, "I know. I love Tammy. Tammy is trying really super hard to do all of the right things, and is involved deeply." She commented. I could see her in Slack, on GitHub. These are iterative. These are all processes that take feedback and time to work through. And so kind of just like Andrew said earlier, they are brave for trying new things. And regardless of whether or not they come around to what we already knew or something new, they're involved. They're living it. And so I appreciate Tammy stopping by and commenting on my little old blog. It was nice. Hi, Tammy.
We mentioned this last week, and we'll talk about it this week, but it's accessibility, and WordPress's accessibility team published a statement on the level of over-accessibility of Gutenberg. And team rep Joel Dolson, who spoke on behalf of the team. This was a collaborated post, by the way, that you could find on the Make.core.WordPress accessibility blog. He says that he cited cognitive load and complexity, inconsistent user interface behavior, heavy reliance on keyboard shortcuts, and difficulties with keyboard navigation through blocks, among other concerns about Gutenberg. He even outlined an example of the keyboard sequence required to do something as simple as change the font size in a paragraph block, which requires 34 separate keyboard stops, and even more if the tester doesn't have prior knowledge of how to navigate Gutenberg. He says that, quote, because the complexity of interaction with Gutenberg is an order of magnitude greater than in the classic editor, we believe that Gutenberg is less accessible than the existing classic editor, though it does offer many great features that are not available in the current editor, end quote. And he also ended the post by saying that that basically that the accessibility team will continue to work to support Gutenberg to the best of their ability. However, based on its current status, they cannot recommend that anybody who has a need for assistive technology allow it to be in use on any sites they need to use at this time, end quote. So they actually proposed a notice to be added with the 5.0 release to inform administrators of Gutenberg's inadequacy for users of assistive technology. So this prompt would actually install the classic editor plugin, but that ticket was closed. There's no really confirmed idea as if that's going to actually happen. But there you go. I mean, it's just a lot of. The good thing is that a lot more people probably than before are talking about accessibility. This is at the forefront of conversations now. And Matt Mulloway actually commented on the article. He was the first comment on the article and talks about some things. But
Matt doesn't always jump in as the first comment. This was good. So here's what Sarah did a really great job of reporting on this topic. In addition to that, Joe did a really good job of what was probably not an easy post to publish, like being very straightforward. Here is our data. Here's what we see. And then as a team that is involved in the greater team, publicly sort of announcing that they're not okay with the current state of things is not, you think twice before you hit publish, I feel like, on a post like this. It's not.
You probably think 4 times.
Maybe.
At least.
Right. And so it's not like it's not It's not mean. It's not bad. It's not meant to be damaging.
And it's not adversarial.
No, it's not. It's really, truly not. And Joe, is a longtime WordPress contributor. I've seen Joe at multiple events for probably 10 years. So if you know Joe, Joe is not trying to cause any rifts or problems. And so to hit publish on a post like that is probably not easy, but it is absolutely 100%. I agree, the right thing to do. Here's the results of our work. Here's what we've come up with. Here's how we feel. Here are the facts. Here's the thought. Here's all of it. Here's literally everything. And even his post, which is worth a read, is really, frankly, much more disconnected and very factual than I could probably really ever be. Here's the data. Here's how we've done, and here's how we've interpreted this data. And his post was the right thing to hit publish on, and then and Sarah's reporting on it was.
So if you look, Gary Pendergast, who we've had on the show, he published a post not too long ago called "Iterating on Merge Proposal Post" or "Iterating on Merge Proposals," where he talks about the merge proposal process and how it's worked over the years, and how Gutenberg was sort of let's try and sort of change things up a little bit on this process. And he actually admitted that they probably should have contacted the accessibility team and got them on board with the project a lot sooner than they did, that communication was lacking there. But at the same time, well, I read that, but I also read of the accessibility team's troubles of trying to keep up with Gutenberg, right, where they would run tests. They would submit back what was wrong with certain interfaces, and then the next, a week later, the interfaces changed, and now you got to do this testing all over again. In addition to the lack of having a React or JavaScript expert on the accessibility team, they couldn't keep up. And really, what they were doing is they were spending a lot of time and volunteer effort to try and keep up, but it kept getting, in a way, wasted or not being usable because Gutenberg was iterating so quickly. And now that we're sort of reached a point where we have a release schedule, 6 weeks later, we're going to try and get Gutenberg out the door November 19th, and we're going to try and freeze the UI and try and freeze the APIs. Now it's like we're expecting the accessibility team to just hurry up and we got to fix everything, when it's just a well, and
Gary's point is is interesting, because if you talk to folks and not to be adversarial about it, but if you look at the GitHub comments and you look at the accessibility chat in Slack, it's not as if they weren't already trying to be deeply involved. They were already commenting and saying, like, hey, this is not really truly accessible, or hey, we've tested this is not what we expect. Like, their involvement, the accessibility team's involvement is not without effort. They as a team tried to be deeply involved, and they were largely kind of either ignored, pushed away, shoved off, They were a secondary process. And so it isn't like the primary Gutenberg team didn't consult with them soon enough. It is ultimately a failure on the greater Gutenberg team for not accepting or acknowledging the feedback that they received from the accessibility team from the get-go. And so reflecting on it, I appreciate it's what everyone should do right now. But it isn't like they didn't try, because boy, did the accessibility team really try. Even up to 22 days ago, did they try? Where they haven't had a good experience as a team, and despite their efforts. So I want our listeners to know that the WordPress accessibility team has been involved. They have been trying to be involved. That frankly just haven't either been able to make the impact that they wanted to, or weren't able to break through to the everyone else the way that everyone else will look back on regretfully, maybe. But the long term, 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, 6 months, what have you, is that everyone now backfills this. They go through and they make it right. They figure it out, and
which appears to be the WordPress way. I mean, if you look at the accessibility advocates, if we brought this up before, their argument is, why is accessibility always something you bolt on? Why isn't it accessible? You start with it being accessible on day one, and you build it into your processes instead of something that you worry about after or when the project's done. And this is the way WordPress core development has worked for years, where accessibility is something you iterate on or you worry about after the fact. And is that ever going to change? I mean, we know about the WCAG 2.0 AA compliance for new code getting into core, but I mean, just the mindset, the process of WordPress development being accessible first instead of later. I mean, is that ever going to change?
Well, the part of it, I mean, as sort of an armchair accessibility advocate, is also that accessibility sort of, even though there are definitions for it, does tend to mean something different for everyone that has different needs. And so
I've been reading a lot about that.
Yep. Color blindness, temporary, permanent. There's a lot of things that determine what makes or doesn't make something be accessible to one person or another. And so it isn't that accessibility is a moving target, but it is that, generally speaking, very, very generally, globally speaking, it means simple. It means simplicity. It means straightforward. It means fewer clicks, fewer tab stops. It means fewer navigational elements.
And that, to me, all of the talk and the reports of accessibility in Gutenberg has proven one thing, that Gutenberg in its current state is overly complex. It is not simple.
Right. It isn't. It is not a simple piece of software, period. End of story. Particularly for the web, where the web does not, I'm gonna regret saying this, but the web and the way that the web is, the way that the web works does not make complex applications easy. It's kind of dumb, and it probably sounds pretty obvious, but I mean, like, you have lots of container wrappers, divs, floats, things that do different stuff, and a lot of those definitions don't exist in the HTML markup themselves. They are stylistic hacks. They are CSS jumping in to make things work. They are JavaScript jumping in to make applications perform and respond the way that they need to. And quite frankly, the web is, as old as it is still maturing when it comes to how accessibility handles these things. It is not like an operating system has had list boxes, check boxes, inputs, text areas for as long as it has. These are like ribbon components. These are like weird things that you're forced to design and create for yourself. And so you have to make them accessible. And sometimes that is not always obvious because you are inventing brand new things for the web. That is one of the things that web components are supposed to solve, but they are not mature. That concept of web components is not really reality yet. So this is the folks with WordPress that are WordPress contributors, that are community volunteers, whose jobs are on the line to pioneer things. This is research and development. This is kind of bleeding edge stuff, even though it doesn't always look and feel that way. So something as simple as a color picker is not really all that simple. And so step one is getting it out there. Step two, unfortunately, is tuning it. So
I like what Andrew said. He was very optimistic that, and I believe, I think it's the truth that within the first 1 or 2 years, once 5.0 ships with Gutenberg and it reaches the masses, that there will be a lot of rough edges that will be discovered. There are going to be a lot of discussions around workflows, how to do certain tasks. And these are all solvable problems. It's just going to take time, and we have to weather through the storm. And like you said, maybe this will encourage a lot of people out there to get their first patch into core, to have their first contribution, because hey, hey, for me, this is an opportunity for me to start contributing back into WordPress, because I live and breathe with the editor all the time, and it's not like the REST API where I got to know, stuff like that. I can actually work with the editor, so we'll have to get through the rough patches, but
that was one of the things.
It's not going to be fun for the first.
Andrew touched on that, and Tammy touched on that in the comment she left on my blog, which I am very honored to have enough people comment on my blog. It's a lot of fun. I haven't had people comment on my blog in a while, so that's a fun thing to have happen. But there's a lot of opportunity that is about to come into for new people, for old people, to improve the way that people publish to the web. And that is what makes WordPress awesome, is welcoming new folks and their talents and their perceptions, their experiences back into the greater project. So
and for me personally, as a user, I'm not managing a lot of sites. I don't feel as if I have a lot of skin in the game here in terms of Gutenberg and the editor and WordPress. But, I felt, and we've talked about this, that Gutenberg, with it being the new editor, has to be on par or better than what the classic editor does. And, there are many things that maybe I don't know about, or that I don't access on a daily basis, that it does do better, or that is easier to accomplish in Gutenberg than the classic editor. But for a simple example, let's say you're writing a paragraph and you want to add an image. Well, in the classic editor, everything is a one block, and the button is right there. You click on that, you get access to your media, you upload one, you mess with it right there in the classic editor. In Gutenberg, you have to actually create a new block, you have to make it an image block, and then you have to try and figure out how to get it into a block, which is maddening if you don't really know how and you haven't experimented. And that's just a very small example of a workflow that I think tons of people use, adding images to their post and adding them to paragraphs, where that workflow is going to have to be smoothed out or made easier for Gutenberg to really catch on, to win a lot of people over.
One of the things Andrew touched on, Tammy eventually made an issue on that she commented on my blog, was the workflow of publishing with it. And I didn't try to be off topic, but was maybe accidentally off topic in the design chat. So if anybody is listening, then accept my apologies for the 2 seconds of attention it took away from it. But when you click publish in Gutenberg, it comes up with sort of this, are you sure you meant to publish experience? It is sort of intentional friction. It is, are you ready to go kind of thing. But I think for me and you, we've been using WordPress for so long that publish, the button, the big blue button that says publish, is kind of final. I mean, there is some finality to clicking publish.
Well, you say that, but I actually installed a plugin that actually gives me that friction, because once you mistakenly hit the publish button once, you never want to do it again.
Right. But having WordPress intentionally do that without a plugin doesn't feel real natural to me. Like, I pretty much trained when I click publish, it's out and it's live, baby. It's ready to go. And so it's one thing to not trust myself. It's another thing for the software to not trust me. And so when I click publish, if what happens next is the software says, hey, man, are you really ready to go here, is different than what I've been used to for like 15 years. Like, it is a change in workflow. It is, I imagine publish is like, here we go, we're ready to go. The word alone is suddenly under scrutiny. The color of the bucket is suddenly a thing that needs to be rethought because you've changed the experience of it. And if there are lots of things that have changed with Gutenberg compared to the old publishing experience. And one of the things in my blog post was like, I no longer know what to call these things. Is it an inspector? Is it a meta box? Is it a pop-up? what is the name of the thing? I think we have come up with terminology over the course of WordPress's lifespan that is relatively familiar to everybody, and Gutenberg comes with it a whole brand new set of terminology that does not have a glossary. What is the thing called? I don't know. The toolbar that has the publish and save draft button, is it a toolbar? What is it called? How do I talk to you about it, Jeff? Like, I really don't know what to call the thing. And because we're so deep and involved in it, I'm a little embarrassed that I don't know what it's called, that I don't know what to refer to it as, without looking at the GitHub issues, the code itself. The fact that it is this complex goes back to the accessibility concerns of, like, if there are this many floating, fixed, docked elements all over the place, how do they navigate them if we can't navigate them freely with just the names of what they're called? So you're right. It's a more complicated UI, and Joe and other folks are on point. Here's another tangent. I love, and this is like comments in general, but also like Reddit or like any other online place where you may have some sort of a conversation. I love watching how like upvotes or likes decrease in value as they get more hierarchical. Like Matt's original post has 14 likes, Milan's 9, Matt's 5, Milan's 5, David's none. They just like, the deeper you go to 0, and then they just like trickle off to like nothing. I don't know who Eyes X 13, and like I love watching the like points add up, like the fake internet points. They don't matter, but they do matter. Like people read them, people responded to them, but the deeper you go is usually the fewer you get. And so Sarah's post about Joe's post, it was pretty smart for Matt to get ahead of that, and Matt's response was exactly what I expect from Matt, is handling it and diffusing it and getting people behind what's happening next. So,
well, I mean, I look at everything that's going on, and I figure, hey, he'll get on stage, he'll do the state of the word, and once you hear him talk about WordPress, he'll soothe you, he'll calm you down, he'll tell you everything is fine, this is what we're doing, and by the end of the hour, he'll have you so pumped up and jazzed for the future of WordPress, you won't even realize all this happened.
So you wonder how much of that, like we talked about with Andrew before the show, how much of that is just having a good accent? You know, you grew up in Texas, you got a good cadence and a good approach to drawing things out. Andrew being Australian. I have a friend of mine, Matt. Gosh, he's from Tennessee. Man, does he just draws people out in a way that's comfortable and makes people listen. And I don't have that power, but watching people with the power, man, that's a skill that I need to move abroad. I need to live with Tammy and Paul Gibbs, and I need to coast along the European countryside for a while and pick up an accent so that people shut up and listen to me instead of forcing people to hear me over the show, because you just don't shut me down enough, Jeff. You don't.
Well, guess what? I'm shutting you down right now. So just for listeners out there, WooCommerce 3.5 has been released. Check it out on the WooCommerce blog. WordPress 5.0 Beta 2 has been released, which is an important release, actually, because in Beta 1, custom meta boxes disappeared. So WordPress 5.0 Beta 2 fixes that, so the custom meta boxes are back. And WP Engine has acquired Array Theme. So if you were an Array Theme customer,
I am.
You will now be a sort of StudioPress Genesis framework customer in the future, and you will be part of
smart
WP Engine.
WP Engine purchasing Array Themes is another one of those. I could have predicted it if I was going to speculate on the show, because it's a brilliant move. WP Engine is hustling. They're out making big things happen, and Array Themes was also Mike and John and the rest of the folk were pushing the envelope with atomic blocks and everything else. It's a brilliant merger to bring what Mike and John were able to do with Array and Atomic and apply it for the future of Genesis. It's these are like two separate things coming together to make everybody else happy. Genesis is a behemoth in the theme space. Array has done a great job of building up customers and making great designs apply to having just a good offering of themes that weren't just about blogs, but businesses and photo blogs and everything else. So it makes perfect sense. And you see it announced and you're like, oh, of course, that makes total sense. So good on everybody for making all of those things happen. I'm happy for everybody.
So we'll have links to those stories and more in the show notes on wbtavern.com. That's going to do it for this episode of WordPress Weekly. Again, go to wbtavern.com to find show notes. And other than that, we'll talk to you again. Actually, I'm like skipping everybody, but you can follow me on Twitter at JeffrJFFR0, where you can follow my rants and raves and praises of Gutenberg as I come up with them at 3 a.m. And John, where can we find you?
jjj.blog, where I may or may not continue to test out WordPress 5.0 betas and posts and see what happens. If there's any dramatic changes, I'll be sure to post them there, or GitHub and Twitter at JJJ.
Excellent. So we'll talk to you guys again next Wednesday afternoon. Until then, stay safe. Enjoy trick-or-treating. Say bye, John.
Bye, John. Bye, Jeff.